Welcome to Life Partner by Casey Lee. This is The Dating Files, a series that examines real relationship dynamics with honesty and care. These scenarios are drawn for educational and reflection purposes. Details may be composite or anonymous to protect the individuals involved. She had a type, and she knew it, and she never thought of it as a problem. Tall, confident, the kind of confident that fills a room without trying. Usually professionally driven, usually well-dressed in a way that looked effortless. A certain kind of humor, dry and quick, and almost always a quality she'd have described as magnetic, something in the way he moved through the world that made her want to stay close to it. She dated different variations of this man several times. Some of those relationships had been good, at least for a while. A few had ended in ways that still stung when she thought about them too carefully. But she hadn't connected those endings back to the type itself. She'd connected them to circumstances, to timing, to the specific things that had gone wrong in each individual situation. When she met Marcus, she felt it immediately, that recognition, not of him specifically, she didn't know him yet, but of the feeling. That particular quality of attention, the pull, the sense that something was already happening before they'd had exchanged more than a few sentences. She noticed it, and she moved toward it. That was what you did with that feeling. That was, she had always assumed, what the feeling was for. The first few weeks were easy in the way that those early weeks always were with this type of man. He was engaging and a little unpredictable in a way that kept her leaning in. He asked good questions and then seemed slightly distracted by his own thoughts. He made plans and then occasionally revised them. He was warm and then intermittently harder to read. None of this registered as a problem. It registered as interesting. It registered as him. She was 6 weeks in when her closest friend asked her a question that she wasn't quite prepared for. Is he actually good to you, or does he just feel exciting? She paused on that longer than she expected to, because the honest answer when she sat with it was that she wasn't entirely sure. He made her feel a great deal, alert, engaged, a little off balance in a way that she'd always mistaken for chemistry. But whether he was good to her consistently in the small ordinary ways that didn't produce that electric feeling, but that actually built something, she wasn't so sure that that was the right word for it. So she started paying attention differently after that conversation. Not looking for problems, not preparing to leave, but just watching more honestly what was actually there. What she saw was this. Marcus was genuinely compelling. He was interesting and smart, and there was real connection in certain moments. But his interest in her was inconsistent in a way that she'd been smoothing over in her own mind. He showed up fully when the interaction was charged, but pulled back when things became more ordinary. He was excellent at the beginning of things and less present in the in-between. He created a particular kind of experience, one that kept her slightly reaching, slightly uncertain, and she had confused that experience with depth. She realized, been confusing the feeling her type produced with the feeling of something real. And this is the particular cost of having a type that's rooted more in sensation than in compatibility. The sensation is real. The pull is real. The feeling of recognition when you encounter it is real. But sensation is not a read on someone's character. Pull is not a read on availability. And the feeling of recognition, when you examine it honestly, is often just familiarity, the echo of a pattern that you've encountered before, dressed in a new person. Your type, if you've never examined it, is largely assembled from your earlier experiences of attraction. The qualities that got encoded as compelling, the specific configuration of presence and distance, Confidence and unpredictability, attention and withdrawal. Those weren't chosen by your wisest self. They were absorbed, learned, and they became the template for what desire was supposed to feel like. And your nervous system has been running that template ever since, flagging the men who match it as significant while passing over the ones who don't. The problem isn't that you have a type. The problem is when the type operates as an automatic filter that bypasses discernment entirely. When a man who matches the template gets a kind of advanced credibility or a head start on your trust, your interest, or your willingness to overlook what you're noticing, simply because he produces that familiar attraction of pull. And when a man who doesn't match the template gets passed over or held at a distance or addressed as lacking something, not because he actually lacks anything important, but because he doesn't activate that same pattern. This is how a type can narrow your choices in ways that have nothing to do with your actual values or your actual needs. You're not screening for compatibility. You're screening for the sensation of familiarity and calling it instinct. What happened with Marcus wasn't that he was a bad person. He was who he was, clearly and consistently from the beginning. What happened was that she hadn't been looking at who he was. She'd been looking at how he felt. And he felt exactly right, in exactly the way she'd always looked for, which is precisely why she hadn't seen him clearly. So she ended things without drama. The conversation was honest and quieter than she expected. He was gracious about it in a way that made her like him more, but she filed that away without letting it change anything. What stayed with her afterward wasn't grief exactly. It was something closer to a question she now had to take seriously. What if the feeling of my type isn't pointing me towards the right men? What if it's pointing me toward a familiar experience? That question didn't make her want to date men that she wasn't attracted to, and it didn't flatten her into someone making spreadsheet decisions about compatibility. What it did was make her curious in a new way about the difference between a pull that she recognized and a pull that was actually taking her somewhere. That distinction between familiar and right, between a pattern and a preference, is quiet and it takes practice to hear. But once you've started listening for it, it's very hard to stop. And that, as it turned out, was not a loss. That was the beginning of something more useful than a type. The question that this episode leaves you with isn't whether to stop having a type. It's whether the feeling that your type produces is pointing you towards something real or just towards something familiar. If that's landing for you, I want to invite you to 2 places. The first is the free workshop, where I go deeper into the specific patterns that drive early attraction and how to use your own pull as information rather than instruction. You can find that in the show notes. And if you want to continue this conversation in the private podcast, where I go into where your type actually came from and how to hold that awareness without losing trust in your own instincts, that's waiting for you in the private feed. The link is in the show notes. This conversation is complete as it is. I'm really glad you're here. Stay steady and aligned with the relationship that you want.